Imagine a lone figure standing on the edge of history, carrying a name that reverberates through American consciousness like an echo from a shimmering past. That figure is Caroline Kennedy, the last surviving child of President John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy, and the final living link to America's Camelot. The scene might be the White House steps in 1963, cameras flashing as Jacqueline, veiled in black, holds a small girl by the hand while the world mourns a fallen president. Or perhaps it's decades later. Caroline, now a grown woman, a mother, a lawyer, a diplomat, but still surrounded by the unstoppable gravity of a mythic name. She is in essence the quiet witness to an era that ended in gunfire in Dallas and unraveled in so many heartbreaks, yet never fully vanished from the nation's memory. For a public starved for any last fragment of Camelot's glow, Caroline became the living embodiment of that lost promise. She never volunteered for the role, but from the moment she was thrust into the spotlight at just 5 years old, it has followed her through every chapter of her life. She was born in 1957, a baby swaddled in the swirling excitement of a young Senate couple with grand aspirations. Her father, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, was not yet president, but the buzz around him was electric. The Kennedy clan, full of glamorous promise, projected an aura that was part Irish resilience, part East Coast aristocracy, and part unstoppable ambition. Her mother, Jacqueline, epitomized style and grace. To the American public, these parents offered an image of renewal. They were the youthful antidote to what many saw as an older, staler political generation. So when her father won the presidency in 1960, Caroline, with her baby brother John Jr., symbolized hope, renewal, even innocence. She was the princess of a new American era. Her father's tenure would come to be romanticized as Camelot, an allusion to King Arthur's fabled court, where ideals shone brightly and the future seemed boundless. Yet that shining moment turned out to be heartbreakingly brief. On November 22, 1963, an assassin's bullets in Dallas ended John F. Kennedy's life, flinging the nation into shock and sorrow. For Americans watching on television, the funeral images, Jacqueline's black veil, the riderless horse, the small children standing by as their father's coffin passed, became seared into the national psyche. Caroline was just 5, old enough to sense that her world had been violently upended, but too young to grasp the full magnitude of events. In a way, the entire country mourned with her, imagining that the fatherly figure they had lost was also her father in a more intimate, personal sense. Except in her case, it was real. For the rest of her childhood, the memory of living in the White House, playing with her father in the Rose Garden, receiving visits from dignitaries, became a specter, an almost fictional paradise overshadowed by unimaginable tragedy. She didn't choose to be the symbol of a collective heartbreak, but there she was, a child pressed between a mother determined to keep her safe and a public desperate to see her as the living fragment of the lost JFK era. After JFK's assassination, the family moved to New York City in an attempt to find some semblance of privacy. In the stately hush of the Upper East Side, Jackie tried to rebuild a life for herself and her children. But the media was relentless, tailing their every step, hoping to capture a photograph or a snippet of conversation that might reveal the next move of the grieving Kennedys. For Caroline, daily existence became an odd balancing act. Classmates knew her as a normal child in a school uniform. The tabloids, however, framed every small act. Her first day at a new school, her walk with Jackie, her childhood friends' birthday parties, as a matter of national intrigue. Even as she outgrew pigtails and discovered her own passions, reading, writing, horseback riding, the swirl of Kennedy mythology never loosened its grip. Some families passed down trinkets or property. The Kennedys bequeathed an entire chapter of national lore. Meanwhile, tragedy continued to stalk the family. Jackie remarried Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis in 1968, moving Caroline and John Jr. into yet another media storm. Some Americans resented the move, feeling Jackie had abandoned JFK's memory. Others saw it as a desperate attempt by a young widow to protect her children from the looming threat of a Kennedy curse. Did Caroline resent the arrangement? Was she at peace with the new stepfather? These were the questions swirling around, but no one truly knew the private emotional landscape beneath her composed surface. She was learning to inhabit a public silence, one in which personal feelings were shielded from the press and polite platitudes stood in for raw emotion. As she matured into a teenager, she discovered her mother's careful separation from politics. Jackie, protective to an almost obsessive degree, wanted to shield her children from the savage intersection of press and power that had destroyed JFK. For Caroline, that meant a strict sense of boundaries, no open invitations to step onto the campaign trail, no temptation to step into the chaos that swirled around her uncles, Robert F. Kennedy and Ted Kennedy, who were actively entrenched in the political sphere. One might assume that being the daughter of a beloved president would naturally lead to a path in politics, but Caroline's approach was more cautious. Politics, after all, was the stage on which her father was killed, and so she gravitated toward academics, ultimately studying at Radcliffe College, Harvard, and then Columbia Law School, forging a life that, on the surface, seemed more private and intellectual. Yet for all her attempts to remain a private figure, life kept intruding. The Kennedys were the American royal family in the popular imagination, a soap opera that never seemed to cease. When Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1968, the country reeled again, layering fresh tragedy onto the mounting sense that the Kennedys were haunted by a curse. Caroline, still so young, watched as her family's heartbreak was broadcast to the world yet again. And then in 1973, her Uncle Ted survived a plane crash. Next, the Chappaquiddick scandal overshadowed his career. There was always another headline, some new drama, some new scandal or heartbreak. And through all of it, Caroline rarely gave interviews, rarely offered her side. She had come to understand that speaking openly about private pain often led to sensationalistic distortions. Silence seemed safer. In 1994, she lost her mother to lymphoma. Jackie's death was a profound personal blow. This was the woman who had anchored her life, who had fiercely guarded her from the monstrous glare of the media, who had shaped her worldview with a mixture of high culture and protective love. With Jackie gone, Caroline became the de facto elder of her immediate family. Yes, she still had uncles, aunts, cousins across the sprawling Kennedy clan, but in terms of that nuclear trio, Jack, Jackie, John, Caroline and John Jr. were all that remained. Then in 1999, yet another catastrophe. John Jr., an aspiring magazine publisher, died in a plane crash off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, along with his wife Carolyn and her sister. The tragedy was so eerily reminiscent of the Kennedy curse that the media erupted once more, dissecting every angle, replaying images of a little boy saluting his father's coffin so many years ago. And now that little boy was gone too. It would be difficult to comprehend the emotional toll of those losses on Caroline. She was, in effect, the last direct survivor of that immediate Camelot family. JFK gone in 1963, Jackie in 1994, John Jr. in 1999. Suddenly the question arose, would Caroline step into the public arena and become the new standard bearer for the Kennedy legacy? Indeed, many wondered if she would do so out of a sense of duty to preserve the Camelot dream, or from a sense that the family name needed representation. But how does one even approach such a question when personal grief is so raw, when life has taught you that the political sphere is fraught with personal hazards and relentless scrutiny? For years, Jacqueline Kennedy had quietly invested herself in law, literature, and philanthropic efforts. She served on the boards of various nonprofit organizations, co-authored books on civil liberties and constitutional law, curated anthologies of children's poetry, and championed education. If politics was the family's trade, Jacqueline danced around its edges but never allowed herself to be pinned down, as if stepping fully in might be stepping onto a battlefield laced with ghosts. Still, in 2008, she made a tentative move toward the Senate seat vacated by Hillary Clinton in New York. Observers were intrigued. Was this Caroline's grand entrance into mainstream politics? The reaction, however, was intense. She faced scrutiny about her experience, her stance on issues, her very identity as Kennedy royalty. The press hammered her relentlessly. A swirl of speculation, criticism, and personal attacks painted her as out of touch. Within weeks, she withdrew her name from consideration. No direct reason was given, but the fiasco confirmed what she likely already knew. Being a Kennedy in the public eye can be merciless, and the modern political climate was even more vicious than what her father had faced decades prior. Yet ironically, or perhaps inevitably, Caroline did find herself in a diplomatic role a few years later. In 2013, President Barack Obama appointed her as the U.S. ambassador to Japan. This might seem surprising for someone who had so carefully avoided the direct limelight of major political office, but in many ways it was the perfect fit. The role was prestigious and impactful, but less brutal than a frontline political campaign in the era of 24/7 cable news. The Japanese public greeted her warmly, partly because of her background and partly because of her approach, calm, elegant, respectful. She understood that in Japan, historical memory is cherished, and her presence as the daughter of a storied president resonated in a culture that values lineage and tradition. Instead of the fiery, combative persona one might expect from a politician, she brought an understated grace that aligned well with diplomatic duties. It also helped that she was the first female U.S. ambassador to Japan, a symbolic milestone that gave fresh dimensions to her public image. Her tenure there was broadly praised, and it allowed her to carve out a public identity that wasn't overshadowed by the tragedies of her past. Yet back home, the question remained, would she take on more prominent roles? Was she poised to run for office now that she'd gained experience in diplomacy? The answer, seemingly, was no. True to her pattern of cautious engagement, Jacqueline slid back from the immediate glare of domestic politics, continuing her involvement in philanthropic activities, writing, and occasionally participating in tribute events for her father or the broader Kennedy legacy. Indeed, one of her persistent burdens has been the caretaker role for the entire Camelot narrative. As the last living child of JFK, she's inevitably drawn into commemorations, museum openings, library dedications, documentary interviews, and anniversary specials. The 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination in 2013, for example, led to a surge of demands for her presence and reflections. People wanted her personal angle, the inside story, the intangible sense of who JFK was as a father. But she rarely offers deep disclosure. She might share carefully curated anecdotes, but the raw emotional core remains private, a defense mechanism honed over decades of living in the crosshairs of media fascination. Her stance seems to be, the public has a right to remember JFK as a national figure, but she, Caroline, has a right to keep certain memories for herself. Beyond the public stage, Carolyn also grappled with building her own family. She married Edwin Schlossberg in 1986, and they have 3 children, Rose, Tatiana, and Jack. Strikingly, she's gone to great lengths to shield them from the fate she endured as a child in the glare of national obsession. No elaborate press briefings, no splashy magazine covers presenting the next generation of Kennedys. Instead, the Schlossberg children lead relatively private lives. One might interpret that as a direct repudiation of the cyclical trauma that can come with being a Kennedy. The children have carved out their own paths, with some dabbling in media or writing, but none plunging headlong into the political realm. Carolyn has never publicly stated, "I fear a Kennedy curse might befall my children," but her actions, keeping them away from the mania, speak for themselves. In the broader tapestry of Kennedy dramas, Carolyn has always been more background than center stage. That, paradoxically, makes her story uniquely compelling. So many Kennedys have been at the forefront: JFK himself, Robert, Ted, even John Jr. in a pop culture sense. By stepping back, by not starring in a high-profile drama, Carolyn reveals a quieter form of resilience. She's the piece of Camelot that did not crumble into scandal, addiction, or sensational news stories. She never had a major meltdown splashed across tabloids, never courted controversy. The cost of that, however, has been a sense of perpetual watchfulness, as though she must remain vigilant lest another calamity strike. Surviving in silence can be a full-time job, especially when the entire world sees you as a living emblem of a fractured American dream. Critics occasionally argue that she could leverage the Kennedy name more boldly in pursuit of philanthropic or political goals. Admirers, however, say that her style, measured, dignified, cautious, reflects a wisdom gleaned from witnessing repeated tragedies in her family. She knows that becoming too visible invites a hurricane of scrutiny. She also knows that quietly carrying the torch might preserve the dignity of the legacy she's inherited. After all, Camelot was a fleeting ideal. If she tried to resurrect it artificially, it would come across as anachronistic or exploitative. She allows the myth to remain in the realm of memory, honoring its best elements: service, youth, courage, without sensationalizing it. Indeed, her posture in the 21st century is often that of a reflective guardian. She oversees the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, ensures her father's documents and historical materials are preserved, occasionally writes or speaks about her mother's influence on arts and culture, and supports various organizations promoting education, literature, and public service. She might appear at a memorial for Robert F. Kennedy or a ceremony naming a building after her father, but she seldom uses these moments as launching pads for personal gain. This is a stark contrast to the way some political heirs trade on their family names. Caroline's approach is understated even if it doesn't satisfy those who crave more drama or revelation. When she does speak, there's a certain weight to her words. People lean in, wondering if they'll glean some new detail about JFK, some behind-the-scenes anecdote about the White House days, or even a new angle on the assassination. But mostly, she remains respectful yet reserved. Over the years, she's occasionally commented that the assassination changed not just her life, but also the country's trajectory. The sense of wonder that gripped the early 1960s gave way to cynicism, war, and deeper societal rifts. Yet she rarely indulges in political commentary on contemporary issues, preferring to champion ideals that reflect her father's legacy: public service, community, and civic engagement, without wading too far into the day's partisan battles. One of the most compelling aspects of Caroline's story is how it interplays with motherhood. As a mother of 3, she has tried to raise her children away from prying eyes, a privilege she never quite had, The Kennedy curse question often surfaces. People ask if she's worried about her children facing the same fate as so many Kennedys before them. She never addresses it head on, but the protective bubble she maintains might be the quietest, yet loudest, testament to her fears. She's seen too many cousins, uncles, and siblings perish in accidents, succumb to addictions, or get tangled in controversies. The family's heartbreaks, plane crashes, assassinations, overdose, scandal, are so numerous they almost form a pattern. Perhaps Caroline's greatest rebellion against that pattern is this controlled, subdued approach, forging a new legacy that keeps her children and herself safe. Even so, her presence remains magnetically tied to the Kennedys' iconic status. Whenever a new generation emerges, a nephew or niece stepping into the limelight, she's sometimes consulted as the wise family elder. She still attends the famed Kennedy compound at Hyannisport for family gatherings, a coastal microcosm where the clan meets to sail, reminisce, and connect across generations. There, in those private moments, she can presumably be free of the historian's lens. Yet the outside world can't help but picture her wandering those same lawns where JFK once strolled, now absent except in cherished anecdotes. It's as though she is a gatekeeper for memories that belong, in some way, to the entire nation, even though they originated in her personal life. What might be next for Caroline? She has served as ambassador to Japan, done her duty as a cultural envoy, and proven her ability to navigate a diplomatic environment with tact. She could, in theory, accept further government appointments or reemerge in the philanthropic or cultural sphere. Some wonder if she might become an ambassador again, or perhaps she'll eventually pen a memoir that shares deeper reflections on her father, mother, and brother. Yet, given her track record, she may favor caution. A sweeping tell-all autobiography seems unlikely. Maybe she'll occasionally appear in interviews commemorating JFK's 100th birthday or the 60th anniversary of the assassination, offering carefully chosen words. The rest, she might keep behind that quiet facade she's cultivated for decades. And so, Caroline Kennedy stands as a paradox, a figure of extreme prominence who rarely seeks the spotlight, a scion of one of America's most famous families who has remained relatively unscathed by scandal. In the swirl of tragedy that is so often the Kennedy hallmark, she is the calm eye, observing, carrying on, raising her children, engaging in public service on her own terms, and refusing to become either a tabloid fixture or a bombastic politician. She is more reminiscent of Jackie than JFK in that sense, protective, private, and quietly determined. Yet every now and then the public glimpses the father in her, the sense of duty, the commitment to certain ideals, the knowledge that she carries a legacy that shaped American identity. One might wonder if the Camelot mantle still weighs heavily on her. After all, that legend has been dissected, criticized, and reinterpreted over the decades. Historians argue about JFK's policies, personal life, and mythic status. Popular culture vacillates between reverence and cynicism. But for Caroline, Camelot was never just an era or a political brand. It was her childhood, her father's face, her mother's poised figure, her brother's naive salutes, the intangible sense that, once upon a time, hope felt unstoppable. Carrying that knowledge, she learned to endure a relentless series of personal and national tragedies, forging an inner strength that few can fathom. In interviews, she's sometimes asked if she feels bitterness or if she regrets not having had a normal childhood. Typically, she answers with grace. She might mention how her mother gave her the best life possible under difficult circumstances, or how she feels indebted to the American people for their affection. Even so, one senses that behind those thoughtful words is a reservoir of unspoken feeling. Such is the lot of a Kennedy, You represent not only yourself, but also a collective memory, a swirling amalgam of national longing and heartbreak. Her story resonates not because of dramatic flourishes. She's not the rebellious daughter who flamed out in a swirl of tabloid scandals, nor the politician who soared or fell in a high-stakes election. She's the quiet figure who keeps going, keeps surviving, keeps remembering. Every time an anniversary of JFK's birth or death comes along, she's asked to speak or attend a ceremony, to place a wreath, to stand at attention while taps plays. She does so with dignity, never overshadowing the moment with personal drama. And that, paradoxically, is perhaps her greatest gift to the legacy, preserving its integrity, preventing it from eroding into trivial sensationalism.